Hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining in on today's webinar. My name is Queenie and I'm the founder of Wise Youth Organization, which is a youth-led organization really focused on personal finance and financial literacy. However, for today's webinar, we're going to be talking about a different topic, which is going to be Canadian scholarships and the application process towards them. And more specifically, we'll be diving deep to talk about the Loran Scholarship. I'm very excited to introduce two of our guest speakers, Olivia and Liam, today, who are 2024 Loran Scholars. And for today, they'll be really diving deep into the whole application process as well as their own personal experience as well. So before we begin, I just want to first explain a bit more about the formatting of today's webinar. So today is a 1-hour webinar, which will consist of two sections. So the first 40 minutes will be a section where Liam and Olivia will be presenting a bit more about the Loran Scholarship and everything that they have to say about it. And then the last 20 minutes will be consisting of a Q&A section where you guys can answer any questions that you ask any questions that you have using the Q&A application on Zoom. So if you look on the bottom middle of the Zoom application, you can use that, or you can also use the chat box and we'll be filtering through all the questions that you have. So please feel free to ask any questions that you have regarding specifically the Loran Scholarship or also the general process of applying to scholarships. And please feel free to ask these questions because this is a very inclusive environment and we really want to help all students out there towards their path to applying for scholarships. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just going to pass it now to Liam and Olivia, who will begin with their personal introductions and also begin the presentation. Thanks everyone for coming today, and I really hope you enjoy this opportunity.
Great. Thanks so much, Queenie.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello everyone. Thanks for coming out. So my name is Liam and I'm joined today by Olivia, and we are both 2024 Loran Scholars. So when we say Loran Scholars, we're going to probably say that word quite a bit coming up here. And that just means that we are people who had won the scholarship. And also Loran Foundation, or the foundation, it all refers to the same organization, the Loran Scholars Foundation, which offers one of the biggest awards for students in Canada. So that's what our presentation is going to focus on today, is that award. But there's a lot of tips in here that I think will be able to help out with any scholarship that you plan on applying for. So to start off, let's introduce ourselves.
Hi guys, I'm Olivia, or Liv. I use she, her pronouns, as you can see in my name tag. And I am a 12th grader at Sentinel Secondary. I'm super interested in courses like research, psychology, really into English. So next year when I go to McGill, as you can see on my screen, currently I have an undeclared major, but I'm looking and majoring in fields like religious studies, linguistics, political science, or sociology. So that's a little bit about my interests. I am pretty involved in my community, specifically in the fields of truth and reconciliation. So working in Indigenous fields of study, as well as in LGBTQ plus activism. So I'll start by telling you a little bit more about truth and reconciliation. About maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I founded my school's first ever Truth and Reconciliation Committee. That started after the recovery of the 215 bodies up at the Kamloops Residential School, which is pretty close to where I live. So that was a shock to me, even though it shouldn't have been, and pushed me into that form of activism. As a committee, we do a lot of fundraising, a lot of education pieces, do a lot of work with other teachers, a lot of community members. It's probably my most meaningful work. It means a lot to me. And then when it comes to LGBTQ plus activism, I help run a support group for queer students in my high school. Currently, we're actually putting on a showcase for art that highlights pride in the LGBTQ community. So I'm looking forward to that. Beyond that, I've done some work in my church. I've been trained in ministry. I've worked as a retreat coordinator. I'm also super interested in political science. So I've done some work for campaigns as a media manager, super into poetry in my free time. I'd say my biggest hobby is thrift flipping. I don't know if I have any thrifters out there, but when I can, I'm in the thrift store spending money I shouldn't be spending on things that I probably won't end up sewing. I also love to weight lift and go to the gym. So that's a little bit about me.
So my name is Liam McCarrigirio. and I'm coming here from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm originally born in Manitoba, but I've lived in a few different places across the city. I mean, across the prairies, I should say. And my pronouns are he, him. And I'm at Miriam M. Graham Collegiate in Saskatoon as a 12th grade student. And I'm planning on attending Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC this fall to study communication. So as you guys know, I'm a 2024 Loran Scholar. And on my road to Loran, I've been involved in a lot of different activities in my community and school, which all come back to creating a sense of connection. That's always been my main goal with what I do. So one of my main activities is I was the founder and currently am the creative director of a podcast club at our school. So our club produces a podcast for students, families, and staff that it increases connection in the school and promotes healthy living. So that's a thing that I really enjoy. As well, I'm the co-president of the student council at my school and a former member of the Library and Archives Canada Youth Advisory Council and the RCMP's National Youth Advisory Committee. So those are some opportunities that I've taken to get my voice out there and help these big government organizations understand how to better work with youth. And speaking of youth, I've also done a lot of work in volunteering with youth in different environments, such as the playgrounds in the city of Saskatoon here, the local Children's Museum, and coming up soon, I'm going to be helping out with a youth radio camp, which is pretty exciting. Sports-wise, I used to play hockey. I was a goalie for a very long time, and while I no longer play, I'm still a huge fan of the game. Big Boston Bruins fan, so if we have any Bruins fans in the chat, go Bruins. I also am a big badminton player too. I played that at school. I also enjoy theater, playing chess, and singing in my school's choir. And in my free time, I like to read, to do some graphic design, and exercise. That's a bit about me. And now we're going to dive into the presentation and more about Loran.
Okay, so the Loran is an organization that strives to identify young people in communities across Canada that really exemplify their three key tenets, which are character, service, and leadership. Essentially, Loran goes beyond being just a financial award. It really goes into the areas of community and leadership growth and personal development. It can be seen as a long-term investment. Helping individuals to be able to see their potential and making a difference. And it really carries through into your university experience. It spans over all 4 years in university. And as we'll see further in the presentation, it can have lifelong effects with the community that's provided. So it really does go beyond just a financial award.
So Loran believes that Canada needs unconventional leaders in every sector. So it looks for well-rounded young people who demonstrate strength of character, commitment to service in the community, and leadership potential. So character, service, and leadership are Loran's kind of three pillars that they look for in students. So over the past 34 years, the foundation has invested almost $58 million in more than 3,200 students. But that amount isn't just given by some Mr. and Mrs. Loran, but rather hundreds and hundreds of individual donors from across the country who also believe in the work that Loran does and want to give high potential youth the opportunity to imagine, explore, and create the future. So today there are 757 alumni and in-stream scholars giving back to their communities and pushing boundaries in fields like technology, arts, finance, medicine, law, government, science, entrepreneurship, and everything in between. I don't think it's a stretch to say that if you're interested in something, there's probably a Loran scholar who has done it. It's a very diverse community, and it's not like a scholarship that is only for STEM students or only for art students. Really, if you're interested in anything in university, Loran is definitely a place that will support you in that journey, which is a pretty unique thing about it and something that I've always believed is a big plus of the scholarships.
Liam, that's such a good point because when we were at the finals weekend, I mean, every single person I met, incredibly unique backgrounds. And there really is someone there that has done what you want to do or someone who can help you out. So really good point. So the Loran selections process really does look beyond the transcript. Grades obviously play a role, super minute role. What really does play a role is the leadership, the character, the integrity. What is specifically looked out for by the Loran interviewers, people who are going through your papers? They look out for indicators such as integrity, grit, determination, resilience. They look for pieces of who you are rather than necessarily your grades or what you score on a test. Yeah, so it does take a really good look at young person's character, and it has a really comprehensive selections process. So actually throughout the process of Liam and I being selected as scholars, we have been examined on paper and in person by about 13 different assessors. So the selections process can essentially be broken up into a few different steps. We started by putting in our application, so written on paper essays, and then we went into quarterfinals, which were pre-recorded interviews, basic interview questions, semifinals, which was a very long 6-hour Zoom call, and then Liam, I see you smiling. Yeah, it was long, and then quarter, semis, and then finals in Toronto. So it really is a super rigorous, in-depth process that are trying to find people that are the right fit for the award. And right fit is a term that came up a lot when I was talking to people, because that really is a two-way street. It's making sure that you are a right fit for the scholarship that is super focused on leadership and super oriented towards personal growth. And then also making sure that the scholarship's the right fit for you. There are expectations for the scholars, such as you have to be able to maintain a 3.7 GPA throughout your university experience. You are expected to attend one out of the 25 partner universities, which Liam will talk more about later. And you are expected to maintain a level of activity in your community. So it really is making sure that you fit the award and the award fits you, and it goes both ways. One of the questions that Liam and I were discussing before this is the commonalities and the common characteristics that we found between scholars or between finalists. And one that we came up with that we thought was interesting to share, and one that we didn't expect, was weirdly there was a lot of people in childcare, youth care. Liam, any other similarities that you found between scholars?
I would say the main thing that stood out to me was how authentic everyone was in the experience. I think normally when you get like 90 people like that together, some people will be a bit more reserved, but everyone was quite vocal and really willing to share stuff about themselves. So I think the common characteristic between all the scholars and all the finalists that we met was they're people who really are authentic and really wear their heart on their sleeve. Even if they're not the most outgoing person all the time, they still really have that trueness to them, was something that stood out to me personally.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's definitely something we'll go over in our tips and tricks slide. But authenticity was super important all the way through from the beginning till the end.
So, as mentioned earlier, the award is more than just money to pay for things. Loran does have a major financial component, but it's mostly there to provide scholars the resources they need to keep them meaningfully contributing in their communities without having to worry about the stress of finances. So, before we dive into the elements of the program that make it the only one of its kind in Canada, here's some of the highlights of what the Loran Award entails. And it's quite a unique scholarship because financially, you get first off an annual stipend of $11,000. So, this can be used for your residence costs, your meal plans, any other living expenses that come up while you're in university. And in your first year, if you do get the award and your residence and meal plan are higher than 11,000, Loran covers the difference. You also get a tuition waiver of $11,000 every year. This is actually billed directly through the university, so you don't even have to worry about making the payments. It's quite a nice thing, and that 11,000 covers the vast majority of university programs completely, at least tuition wise. You also have a one-on-one mentorship with a local leader. So Loran will match you up with someone in your community who's well respected, and this person will teach you a bit about that community and show you how you can get involved and also help you kind of kickstart your career and overall just be a positive voice that's on your side as you start your university journey. We'll get more into that a bit later. As well, Loran offers a summer experiential learning program in 3 different sectors. This is if you don't know what experiential learning is, it's like a co-op program. It's kind of temporary work that you can do in the summers or when you're not in school to kind of learn more about what you want to do for your career. So it's a huge part of the award and definitely something that's pretty unique. And as well, they offer a mentorship and a values-driven, diverse community that comes to that orientation experience, annual retreat, events, a national network, and a lifelong community. And the Loran community is truly lifelong. I know at our finals, there was actually at the same time a reunion for people who had become scholars in 1996 or something like that. So it's a community that really is lifelong and has that amazing effect. And that's a pretty unique thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, super unique. I mean, I know for now, even like the community, I still am in contact with people that I've met at finals, whether they're scholars or not. So the community is definitely a huge part of it.
Absolutely, and it really is a lot of great people. And I'm not a person that normally will talk to people online that I don't know really well, but immediately as soon as I started chatting with some Loran finalists and stuff, even when I hadn't met them in person yet, I was just really struck by how kind and how caring these people are. So it's definitely a cool part of the experience.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think that's something that's really interesting to bring up is how kind everyone really was. I know going into the finals weekend and even going into semifinals, I was expecting it to feel like a competition, pretty cutthroat. There's a lot of money on the line. Everyone's ready to knock the next person over. And it was the complete opposite. It wasn't seen as a competition. It was seen as this cooperation, this community, where everyone's cheering each other on. So I think that's just really highlights what Loren is at its core.
Yeah, and that's definitely something for any scholarship, even though there is a lot of money, like you said. I think that a lot of scholarship organizations aren't necessarily looking for the most competitive, the most cutthroat people. Not at all. They're looking for people who they're willing to share their experience with others and help others rise. That's something to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about mentorship. Um, as Liam noted, mentorship is a facet of the Loren Award. So you're matched one-on-one with a community leader. So that could be a president of a NGO, could be a CEO of a business, community leaders of many different places and orientations, and really they fit you for what you're wanting to do in the future. We can't really speak a ton on mentorship because we actually haven't been matched with our mentors yet. But I think that the mentorship really does highlight how this Loren Award is more than just a financial reward. It really is a thing that carries over 4 years because this mentor is someone that you will be able to continuously meet with over your 4 years. You'll be able to build a relationship with them. They'll be able to help you get connected into the fields that you're wanting to go into. And they're able to help push you in the right direction, encourage you to explore new things. Equally, there's also the 4th year transition program, which your mentor will play a role in. That program comes into play when you're at your last year of university, when you're in 4th year, and it's time to now transition out into postgraduate life, life beyond university, and that's where your mentor can also play a really big role.
Absolutely. I just want to mention, I just want to answer one question that came up in the chat. And one person asked how many people were awarded scholarships this year, and then how many people were in the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals. So each year, Loran selects roughly 36 scholars. That was a number for us. So that's the people who get the full award. And then 90 people go to finals each year. That number is always the same as well. And then for the semifinals, it's roughly about 200 people are selected, somewhere in that our range. I think it's roughly that number. And then the quarterfinals, to be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure about that number, but that's the rough estimates for each year. Olivia, correct me if I'm wrong, but
I've got my desktop open, so let me answer that question with the power of the internet.
nice.
Um, Nothing's coming up, guys. Probably about 400 or
Yeah, so
500.
quarterfinals around 400 to 500. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a good amount, and it's definitely considering how many people apply, that it's still a pretty slim margin, but it's definitely something to invest time in. So
really.
let's talk a bit about the summer experiential learning program. So for Loran scholars, summer academic breaks represent opportunities for some of the most synergistic and transformational learning experiences of their university careers. So assisted by Loran's extensive network and up to $14,000 in funding, students enrich their studies by building practical skills and experience in the professional world to which they will one day contribute. So whether spent in Canada or abroad, Loran summers are designed to provide scholars a greater breadth and understanding of the interactions and intersections between the private, public, and non-for-profit sectors. So those are the three main areas that Loran gets their scholars to work in during their summers. So a private business, public policy or government, and a non-for-profit or charity organizations. Those are kind of the rough three categories. So during those public policy summers, you'll be working in the process of policy creation. For enterprise summers, you'll be working with the mission and goals of a for-profit environment. And then scholars in their community development summers, we'll be working with non-government and non-for-profit organizations. So it's a really valuable experience because it allows you to test out different areas. You know, working for a business is a lot different than working for a charitable organization in many ways. So you get to try that with Loran, and it's definitely something that allows you to have a better idea what you want your career to look like after you're done university. So me and Olivia are first year, so we haven't had our summer experience yet, so we can't talk a ton about specifics of it, but it's definitely an important part. And many other scholarships offer somewhat similar learning, like working opportunities. I know, like for example, the TD scholarship allows you to work with TD in the summers. I don't think and many of them are as large and in depth as Loran when it comes to their network, but it's still something to consider when you're looking for different scholarships to apply for.
Yeah, Liam, I think that's a really good point. I think there are definitely other scholarships that have similarities and crossover with Loran, but I think what really makes Loran unique is just the breadth of the network that they have and the connections that they have, not only in Canada, but across the world. So on that note, let's discuss community. The Loran community is, like I said, a huge network of alumni, volunteers, mentors, supporters, and obviously the scholars, the people who have received the scholarships. And it's a community that holds itself to a high standard. It is, as we've discussed before, an incredibly inclusive and incredibly open environment. And it's supportive and it's dedicated to service to others. And it is, from my experience, an incredibly driven community. So we haven't had a ton of experiences with Loran, but just to share a little story about how I see the community of Loran is on the last night of the final selections, we had a huge talent show. And we had karaoke and we did line dancing from Alberta and we had a magic show and gosh, I can't remember the other acts, but in that moment when we were all crammed in this room after 2.5 days of hardcore interviews, I went, wow, this right here is community. Even though I've known these people for 2 days, I feel like I've known them for much longer. And that was a really special moment. And honestly, that is what made me really want the award. And that's what really made me look forward to that phone call.
Yeah, absolutely. The community is completely amazing, and that talent show was a great. It's just like you said, it's a great example of just how amazing the community is.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely. So let's talk a bit about the partner universities. So when it comes to scholarships, it's a very important thing to look for when you're considering what scholarships you want to apply for is those partner universities, because some only work at one or two universities. Some can work at any. Loran's in the middle because there's 25 partner universities from across the country. So Loran has a partner university in every province except PEI, and there's none in territories as well, but everywhere else has a partner university, including many of the largest and most prestigious schools and some of the smaller ones as well. So Loran scholars are strongly encouraged to go to university in a new part of the country. So this provides a chance for scholars to, become more independent, spread their wings, discover new communities, and gain respect for different regions of Canada. So ultimately, this is the scholar's decision. So, for example, I always lived on the prairies, but I'm going to BC for university, and Olivia always lived in BC, but now is going out to Quebec. So that's just an example how Loran encourages you to try out new things. So scholars are welcome to study in French or English, and you still need to apply and be accepted to university, but you don't have to have applied to university before you submit your application. So I know that was something that stressed me out when I was applying because I had like 6 different schools that I was considering, and I wasn't sure honestly if I had to have that chosen before I applied for Loran, but you don't. There's still some Loran scholars from our age group who are deciding on our university, and it's May. So it's something you definitely don't have to figure it out when you're applying in the fall.
Yeah, I like what you said. And just to touch briefly about studying in English and in French, one thing that shocked me about the Loren community is how bilingual it is. There'll be conversations going on in French and in English all around you. So that's just another special tidbit about the community. Um, so in addition to the 36 Loren Awards that are given annually, there is also 60 one-time provincial, territorial, and finalist awards. I believe. Yeah. Yeah. I have my notes pulled up. So there are 60 Loran Provincial and Territorial Awards given out. These are $2,000 and they're one-time awards, and they're given out to outstanding people seen in the semifinals. I see the question. I will get to it in a second. So those are given to people in the semifinals levels who really stood out but were not chosen to move forward to the next stage. So those are $2,000. And then at the finalist stage, those who are not selected as Loran Scholars, every other finalist receives a $6,000 Loran Finalist Award, which is a one-time payment and is used as an award for those who have made it that far. Really, at any position that you get to within the process, it is beyond just the money. It also is such an introspective process. So there's gains on all sides. To answer the question, did you feel that of the successful scholars, were most of them using the opportunity to travel? I know that there are a lot of scholars choosing to move across the country, either from one end to the other, depending where they live. I know for me, there's one other scholar joining me in McGill, and quite a few who are coming to UBC. Liam, do you know if anyone else is going to SFU with you?
No, nobody is not coming to SFU, but there is a lot at UBC, like you said. And yeah,
Like
I would say, sorry, what?
there's like 14 scholars out at UBC.
Yeah, there's quite a bit there. I would say in regards to the traveling, like I'd say the majority of our group is going to be traveling for school. I know there's a few who are staying at home, but I believe Loran does strongly encourage that you live in residence in your first year, even if you are even if you are staying home or in your general region. So they still encourage you to kind of live on your own and gain the independence, even if you're not traveling across the country.
Yeah, what is really pushed by Loren is to follow an unconventional path. And so, for many scholars, although not for all scholars, that unconventional path is traveling or moving away. So, that's why it's so encouraged.
And I would say that that is something that's quite unique to Loran. Not every scholarship will have that type of requirement for how you go about your university experience. That's a pretty unique thing. So if that's something you're worried about, it's not every single scholarship, and it's something that Loran works with when people are feeling unsure about traveling. So definitely not a barrier if you're still interested.
Absolutely.
So the eligibility requirements for applying for the award. So you have to be graduating from high school or CEGEP, which is those are high schools in Quebec in 2025, and you have to present a minimum cumulative average of 85% or R score of 29 in Quebec. You also have to hold Canadian citizenship or permanent resident status and be born between January 1st, 2003 and September 1st, 2009. So some more detail in there is that 85% is a general minimum, but Loran looks more at the overall academic pattern. So it's an eligibility criteria, but not a selection criteria. So once you meet that 85%, it doesn't matter if you have 86 or if you have 98. Loran's criteria is around the evidence of character, that commitment to community service, and that leadership potential. So you're not compared to others based on your grades. It's more about your activities and how you live your life and how you walk through the world that Loran is looking for, rather than your academics, I suppose. The permanent residence, if that's something that you are concerned about, it must be granted by the Loran application deadline. And this is because tuition fees provided by university partners must be domestic fees. You can't be asking Loran to cover international fees. Those are much higher. So they want to make sure that you can go to school in Canada with those domestic fees. And I just see one question in the chat here to ask, how do you balance your busy schedule also applying for the Loran Scholarship? That's definitely a really good question. For me personally, I had known about the scholarship, so I kind of had planned out some time and done some other homework earlier to have time to start applying once the application opened up. I luckily had a spare during my high school, so I was able to do it during that time. But I think it's really just about prioritizing your work, right? You have to think like, okay, this other project or this other assignment, is the deadline going to be sooner than the Loran deadline? Which should I work on first, right? And it's really about that time management and that prioritization that will allow you to get it done within the limits. And Loran does give you a fair window, which we'll get into for applying. So even if you have a really busy schedule, there should be enough time to make that work. So Olivia, do you have any comments on how you were able to balance your schedule while applying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being on top of it and understanding the time frame and being ready to submit is super important for me. I was super lucky. I had two spares this year, so I had a lot of time to prioritize my schoolwork. But yeah, I mean, especially when you get to grade 12 and you're balancing maybe advanced placement courses, you're balancing a lot of homework, a lot of tests, and then also university application. It really comes down to just figuring out what's the most important and then following that. For me, Loran was super important. So I prioritized that. And it just comes really down to personal choice.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all up to what you want to prioritize, and if there's something else in your life that is going to take precedent, then you'll have to choose that. So
Okay, so let's discuss how the actual application process works. So, first step, which we're doing right now, so is to learn more about the Loran Award. So, I hope for anyone who is interested in applying that this is only the first step or maybe the second step if you guys have already done some reading. But there are a lot of resources out there. The Loran website has made it so that it's encouraged for people to apply. They really want to get more applicants. That's what's important to them. Touching back on that community element. So, search it up in your search bar. Also, one thing that I found was super interesting. Weirdly, a lot of information on Reddit. Spent a lot of time on Reddit looking at Loran stuff. I see Liam nodding.
the
Yep.
Loran subreddit, oh, that was a godsend. There's so much great information in there. I,
On
I
there.
actually made a Reddit account just to look at Loran stuff, so that's a good tip.
Yeah, so take a look on Reddit. Other social medias, there's probably stuff on there. Loran has a great Instagram page. Um, Also, obviously, if you want to reach out to scholars, I am here if anyone would like to reach out to me, so I can share my email at the end. The second step of the application process is to actually start the application. Easier said than done. It can be pretty daunting. The actual application is quite a few essays, short response questions, and your resume. So it really is important to just stay on top of it, plan it out, make sure that you have time to write your essays, make sure you have time to review your essays. What's really challenging is that the essays are only 350 words. And so I know for me and probably for Liam, we had a lot to say and a lot to share, and only four essays and 350 words each to do it in. So cutting it down was the real challenge. Um, Beyond that, what is probably the most important is to leave enough time for your reference. Make sure to ask permission and to check in with your reference beforehand and give them a good chunk of time to write your reference in. A week is not enough time. 2 weeks is not enough time. I would aim for a month, more than a month if you can, just so that they have the opportunity to write something that really reflects you and your character and the work that you've done. I think the reference plays a really big part in the application process, but that's just, I guess, on my part, just because I know how committed they are to character. And then beyond that, hit the submit button. And then track your progress. They actually have an online tracker, which was super scary, and I kind of actually hated it. But um, you know, it's just about staying on top of it and like we said before, prioritizing the work that you have in order to be able to get it all done.
So now that concludes the main part of our presentation. We're going to share some advice with you that we've kind of cooked up on what we feel is important when you're applying for this scholarship and also maybe for some other scholarships. So the first point here is when you're answering questions, be sure to cover your past, your present, and your future. The way that I thought of this is because I was developing this around Christmas time. I thought of a Christmas carol. There's a ghost of Christmas past, there's a ghost of Christmas present, and a ghost of Christmas future. And that's how I thought about it with the answers, right? You want to cover what you've done, what you've learned from doing those things, and what you're going to do next with those lessons. And I think that strategy helps give the evaluators a complete picture of you and your answers. They can kind of see what you've learned and how you've grown. And the big part of that is reflection is key when you're thinking of that past and when you're thinking of that future as well. You really need to dive deep into yourself and really understand those underlying motivations for why you do what you do and what you learned from it, and really be honest with yourself. And and this isn't just a place. Any scholarship is not a place to brag about what you've done and just list different activities. Loran wants to see you've personally grown thanks to your activities. So you definitely want to incorporate how you've grown and how you've developed as a person thanks to the activities you've done in your community. So that's a big component as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said about the Carol. I had a really similar method for both how I wrote my essays and how I answered during the interviews, and I called it the Loran sandwich. So I would go in with my theme, generally what I wanted to talk about, more light, fluffy, abstract stuff. The meat, I'd give an actual example, and then I'd go back to the main theme. So similar to the Carol, it really is about showing your motivations and who you are as a person. And that goes into my piece of advice: always be yourself. I know that at the beginning, when I was writing the first few iterations of my essays, I wrote what I thought they wanted me to say. They can see through that really easily because they've interviewed and read so many applications. So just really be yourself, be authentic. I actually have a pretty funny story about me being so authentic in one of my interviews. It was my final finalist interview. It was a panel interview. I was really scared, and at the end of my interview, I almost started crying because I was so happy it was over. Um, so I think that just shows the importance of vulnerability. As I was wiping away tears and walking out of that interview, I think they saw my vulnerability and my authenticity and who I really was as a person and as a teenager. They're not expecting you to be adults. They're not expecting you to be this well-rounded person. They're not even expecting you to have it all figured out. When they ask me, "What do you want to do with your future?" my answer every time would be, "I don't know," because I don't know, and I'm a teenager, and that's how I'm going to present myself because that's who I am. So always be authentic.
That's a great point, Olivia. And to add on to that, another component of being authentic is if you're not sure about an answer, don't be afraid to ask them to say the question again. That's something that when I got to the interview stage, that I actually had to do once in one of my final interviews as well. I didn't understand the question. I was just kind of stalling. I just had to say like, "I'm not sure if I fully understand. Can you repeat that?" And they're totally fine with that. And that's another thing for any scholarship is to consider that's a totally okay thing to do. Another piece of advice would be to try and find common threads throughout your activities and experiences to tie your story together. We're all very complex people, and it can be hard, especially with the word limits, to kind of boil yourself down into something that's understandable for someone who has never met you before. So when you're doing a scholarship application, I think it's very useful to try and find recurring themes in your activities. For example, I would look at my podcast club that I did and working with youth and think, okay, both of those are trying to create connection in my community and then refer to that in both of those answers. Because then the evaluator would walk away thinking, wow, Liam really likes to create connection in his community and something they remember. It makes you more memorable and it keeps your application a bit easier to understand. So again, it does come back to that reflection piece is really thinking deeply about those activities and kind of those underlying things that you might not have thought of previously.
Absolutely. And that's a really good point about how you're actually phrasing your application and your answers using that reoccurring vocabulary just so it can become a little bit easier to hold on to. So what I say on the bullet point and what I've noted before is just don't treat it as a competition. Instead, view it as an opportunity to reflect and grow as a person. This was actually probably the most reoccurring question I got in semifinals and finals of how has the Loran process helped you grow as a person? And going into it, having talked to a scholar before I went into my interviews, I didn't think I'd actually have an answer to this question. But then I realized that the Loran Scholar application process really did help me grow as a person. So to not treat it as a competition and to rather see it as an opportunity for growth really does actually allow you to grow. And I think that's really important, really awesome. It's done a lot for me, Liam. I'm sure it's done a lot for you, as I'm sure it's done a lot for all of the other scholars.
Absolutely. After this experience, I really grew and I really felt more confident in myself and my abilities, and also was more aware of where I could grow in my activities and such. So it's definitely a key point there that any scholarship application is a great time to grow and think more about yourself and what you do. And then the last kind of point of advice here is scholarship essays are a very unique form of writing that you probably haven't done before in school or any other environment. So be sure to practice formulating your answers before the application period begins, because it takes time to convey a story like that within those word limits. 350 words feels like a decent amount, but when you start writing, you run out fast. Believe me, I spent more time editing my answers down than probably writing them. And I think the same would go for many of the scholars. So I would suggest try applying for another large scholarship first, if one is open, to try, or at least write like practice questions, just make up some questions and try writing out answers in 350 words, or get other people to make questions for you, like a parent or something. Definitely key to kind of practice that a bit ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure. Practicing ahead of time is super helpful, especially with the word count. I agree with you. Spent a lot of time editing. So the 2025 application season opens on September 6th, 2024, and it is closed on October 15th at 8 p.m. ET. One thing that's super important to keep in mind, and this applies to all scholarships, is to keep in mind the time difference. PST, EST, I've made that mix up a few times and missed a few meetings. Luckily, I didn't miss the application deadline, but important thing to keep in mind. And don't wait till the last minute to press submit, because the service will be just chock full of people submitting, because about 5,500 people apply annually. So do it beforehand and bet on yourself. I know that going into it, I didn't think I'd end up where I am. I honestly didn't think I'd make it to the second level, especially having read through the bios of the 2023 Loran Scholars and going, oh my God, they all do really cool stuff. But just have that confidence and understand that if you are yourself, if you're authentic, then you definitely have what it takes.
Absolutely, that's very true. I also never thought I was going to be in this presentation talking to you guys right now. I know the goal for me was just trying to get to the second level, and that I was happy with that. And I was like, okay, the rest is just gravy now. And I'm still reaping the gravy, which is a pretty neat thing.
Yeah.
So that concludes our presentation for today. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And we're now going to open up the floor to some questions. So I see we already have one, and it asks, are there any other similar types of multi-year scholarships that you have come across? So I'd say the scholarship that gets compared to Loran the most would be the Schulich Leaders Scholarship. So that scholarship is only for students who are in STEM and engineering fields. So, technology, science, math, that kind of area. But it has a very similar, so multi-year um, format to it. It also has a very strong community, and it opens a lot of great doors in a similar way to what Loran does. And it has a large financial component as well. And the other one that gets brought up a lot is the TD Scholarship for Community Leaders. That's something I've referenced before in this presentation, and it's a very similar one where it's built on the people who get selected are people who are really involved in their community and making a difference in that way. So that's one that I see come up a lot too, and it has a similar summer working experience, except all the work experience is through TD Bank. So those are the two that would stand out. I'm not sure if you know any others, Olivia, but those are two for me.
You definitely know a lot more about scholarships than I do. Um, I would say when it comes to scholarships, there are a lot out there. Make sure to do your research, because especially coming down to specific things that you do or specific things that you're interested in, there will be scholarships specialized towards you. So as we talked about before about Loran being the right fit, if Loran isn't the right fit for you, there is a scholarship out there that will be. So to do your research, but as someone who's arts focused, humanities focused, Loran was the best possible fit for me, and I feel incredibly lucky to be here now. So, yeah. I see the next question as, are there a certain number of scholars chosen per province every year? I know that when it comes down to the finalist selection, there is not a specific quota chosen between scholars per province. But when it comes down to, I believe, semifinals and quarterfinals, there is a quota put in place in order to assure equal distribution across provinces and territories. That being said, there are still a lot of people across the territories. I know there's someone in our class from like Nunavut, which I think is super cool, because to me, Nunavut is a million miles away. So it's cool that there is definitely that cross-Canada community. Liam, anything to say on that?
Yeah, just kind of following up on you said, like there is no quota like that. When you get down to nationals, it's more you're put into random groups and they kind of select off that group. So it's not really based on geographics at all once it comes down to the finals. But you're right, once it gets to semifinals, quarterfinals, there is that geographical, but it's still all over the place. Like I know in 2020, there were 4 scholars that came from Saskatchewan. In 2021, there were 0. And then in 2024, there was me and one other. So it's quite variable. It's a bit all over the place when it comes to that. So yeah, I do see one other question here, and it says, if there is there any limits to the amount of other scholarships you can be a part of or receive besides the Loran Scholarship?
Great
Now,
question.
that is a great question. So the way it works is that when it comes to merit-based scholarships, so this is something like a Loran that you would be awarded based on your activities or your academics or something like that. You can receive up to $10,000 in scholarship money per year. So that's a big one. That's a big rule, so you can't go over that. But if it's based on financial need and not merit, then it's unlimited. The other
Yeah.
key thing to keep in mind too is that universities pay a part of the Loran Scholarship. Your tuition waiver is actually not paid by the Loran Foundation; it's paid by the partner university. So in my example, Simon Fraser University is actually covering my tuition on Loran's behalf. So often they will not give you another scholarship because they're already giving you a very large one. I had that experience with Simon Fraser. I was offered a scholarship that would actually fit within Loran's 10,000 rule, but I wasn't allowed to take it because Simon Fraser was already giving me a scholarship, which was through Loran. So that's one of the key piece to keep in mind. Olivia, do you have anything to add?
I think you've covered it really well. The 10,000 rule is definitely a solid rule within the Loran community. And also to note, when it comes down to merit-based scholarships, that does include athletic awards as well. The next question I see, does the Loran Foundation focus on any certain area of social justice? That's a great question. I'm someone who's really passionate about social justice. When Liam spoke about creating themes within your application, my theme was social justice. Um, so no. To put it simply, Loren is such a diverse organization of people that yes, there is definitely a pocket of scholars that are super passionate and revved up about social justice. But also, if you turn around, there'll be someone who's really into law or really into business or astrophysics. So within Loren, you will be able to find people who are really passionate about that. But also, if you're sitting there going, social justice isn't my thing, you'll be able to find people who are passionate about other stuff as well. But needless to say, there will be community members and people who are working within the Loren who are clued into that social justice network and who will be able to help push you in the right direction. Liam, what do you think about that topic?
Yeah, you've explained it really well. I will add that if let's say you're passionate about social justice, that's the key thing that Loren wants to see is that passion. If you're really invested in something and you really want to make a difference in that area, whether it's business or science or social justice, that's the key thing that they want to see is that commitment to it. So I think that's what they look for more than a specific area or topic.
Yeah, exactly. I think it really does come down to that raw passion and really not focused on actually what you want to do in the future. I cannot count how many times I said throughout my interviews, I don't know, because they don't expect you to have everything figured out. It really is based around just passion and what you're interested in and doing what you love. Liam, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, for sure. So I see another question, and it says, "Do you have any advice on how to engage in the community?" That is a amazing question. I love that question. So I would say a tip that comes to mind is you have to be able to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. Because when you're starting something new, there's going to be a lot of things that are unknown. You might not know the people involved, you might not know the location or some of the topics or skills that are required, and that can be scary. I know that scared me away from some opportunities when I was younger, as I was just too scared to engage. So I think I would really suggest to just put yourself out there, And it will be scary at first, but eventually, if you stick with it, it's going to become really comfortable engaging with whatever activity you want to do. And I think all organizations and people really appreciate when students like you show interest in engaging and, like seek out those opportunities to help. It's something that people really value. So they'll be very patient with you and very accommodating. I've never had an experience as a student where somebody hasn't been kind to me, whether I'm volunteering or working in a certain area. So I would definitely say it can seem a bit scary at first, but once you get past that first hurdle, it becomes a lot better. So you just kind of have to have the courage to take that first step. That's a huge thing. Um, and I would also recommend, checking out if you are looking for places to engage and you don't know where to, check out some different accounts online. I know there's one that I follow from the government of Canada called Leaders Today on Instagram, which is definitely one I would recommend checking out if you're looking for different ways to engage on a national level. And yeah, just on your city's websites, there might be some opportunities. Just really kind of using the internet as your friend to find those opportunities to engage. Olivia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I really agree with what you said about putting yourself into uncomfortable situations. As a diehard introvert, I definitely had to put myself into a lot of uncomfortable situations. I would say reach out when you're given the opportunity to be in a social environment where you can network with people or you can meet people. Get in there, try your best. As my parents say, turn on your inner extrovert, and just start shaking hands and reaching out and being authentic. It will be uncomfortable. It is super uncomfortable for me. It will continue to be uncomfortable for me before I find it comfortable, but it is about pushing your boundaries and being in those uncomfortable spaces. So the next question I see is, can you please share the 4 essay topics for the application? So I'm not sure if these essay topics change year per year. I assume they probably do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they do.
I
Yeah.
see Liam nodding.
Yeah,
Um,
the questions change a little bit each year, so there's no sense, I think, looking at the previous applications because they will change those up.
yeah,
But there is, I believe, on the website some practice questions or some example questions. So if you are interested in what kind of essay questions they ask, I would recommend checking that out and taking a look.
absolutely. And I would say, once again, when it comes to the kind of information they're trying to get from the questions, I think that'll be pretty universal no matter what the question is. And that is, they want to know your motivations, they want to know your values as a person, they want to know what drives you, and they want to know what makes you unique. They aren't really curious about your grades. They might be interested in the work that you've done in your community, but they're interested in that because they want to know who you are. Um, and I'll keep repeating it. Just don't be afraid to be authentic. Um, it's so important. I can't repeat it enough. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's very true.
Yeah.
I see one more question here. Who would you recommend is using as a reference, teacher or community reference? That is a really great question. So different scholarships have different kinds of references they request. Often they'll actually ask for two. Normally one is from your school and one's from in your community. So that's something to keep in mind. But Loran only asks for one. So I would, for my reference personally, was a teacher I had who would also supervise one of the extracurriculars that I led. And I chose that because they knew me in multiple contexts. They knew me as a student, and they also knew me in that kind of extracurricular, that podcast club space. So that's something that I would recommend is somebody who knows you in those multiple types of contexts. And I also chose them because I felt that they were reliable and I knew they were available during the fall application period and they would have the time. So that's something that you should definitely check when you're thinking about references is where they have the time to commit and provide a high quality reference, because I do think references can often be the difference maker if it's a really close between multiple applications. That's something Loran definitely looks for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Finding someone who's available is super important, because while there is definitely a big window for your reference to get their letter in, if it is in late, then the application just won't go in. Also, excellent point on having a reference that has seen you in multiple lights. So my reference was my high school principal, who's seen me as a student, but who's also seen me as a club leader, a club member, and someone who's run different initiatives in the school. So being able to get that variety of professional context, but also just who you are as a person. And there's a question in here for you.
Oh, yeah. So this one asks, as from a fellow Sasky, how's it going, fellow Sasky? How did you find the opportunity to and promote yourself when everything is on such a small scale compared to other places? This is an amazing question. I would say, you mentioned the small scale. I think it's something that us Saskatchewanites can use to our advantage. It's a smaller community than places like Vancouver and Toronto, and that means there's more opportunities and it's a bit easier to get into those spaces because there's less resources for these community organizations and there's less youth that are interested, just because there's less people here. So I think it really helped when I realized that because it's a smaller place, there's more of that community, and there's more opportunities there. And like I said earlier, I would definitely recommend looking online. I got involved in a lot of virtual things with those national committees, and those are things that any Canadian youth can access, regardless of whether you're from Toronto or a tiny or like Rankin Inlet and Nunavut, right? So any size of community can benefit from those opportunities. So that's something I would definitely recommend is look for, if you can't find it in your community, look in other communities, if that makes sense. So hopefully that helps my fellow Saskatchewanite.
So the next question that I see is how much time do references have to commit? Do they get interviewed too? Great question. References commit how much ever time it would take them to write a letter. I believe the letter is also 350 words. Correct me if I'm wrong, Liam. Spanning about a page. So depending on how much time your reference can put into it, that's how much time they will put into it. If you know what I'm saying, it's not super time consuming. They will not have to do an interview. It really is just a one-off letter. I'm really lucky because my reference dedicated a lot of time towards my reference, towards my written piece. But I know that can switch between people. And so touching back on what Liam said, it's important to pick a reference who does have that time that can commit to it, and has enough time to commit to it to make sure that you get a letter of high quality.
Absolutely. I will also make one note that the scholarships can vary in different ways, and how they get the letter. Because some just ask the person to write it themselves and set it in as a PDF. Some have a form where the letter is kind of broken up into different sections, that the person has to fill out. So Loran falls into the category with forms. So it's not like a PDF that's sent in. It's they have to log into a similar portal to what you'll use and answer the letter prompts through there. So that's something to keep, at least that's how it was for our years. That's something to keep in mind, if your reference has any questions about that.
Mm-hmm. Go for it, Liam. I believe
No, you go. You go.
Okay. Do you have any advice on how to form close relationships at school for references? I think that's a great question. What we discussed beforehand about putting yourself into uncomfortable situations, I think that's really important. A lot of the work that I do is working with teachers because we're working towards the same goal. I don't know, Liam, if your work is similar, but for me, I work on a committee with other teachers. So I do have a working relationship. I'd say if you want to form those close relationships, it's about being consistent, being reliable, being dependable. And then also, if you need to submit something, just these nitty gritty details, emailing them from your email address, showing up to the meetings, asking questions, following up after, being that presence and being consistent so they know that you're there for the long run. And then also not having a motivation that's purely based around just wanting to get a letter, and instead basing that motivation around wanting to build a relationship and wanting to build a relationship that's going to grow throughout the years that you're in high school.
Absolutely. Those are some really great points. I would add on to, if your reference is just a teacher and someone that you haven't worked with a ton outside that classroom time, you can also make it work. I would definitely recommend, and this is a good tip for any relationship, is just ask them questions, right? Get to know them, see what's going on in their life, and they'll feel more connected to you. And that's a really key part.
Totally. Yeah. Treat them as people. 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of, because there's like students and teachers often have like a pretty rigid dynamic there, kind of the teacher-student relationship. So if you take the time to kind of, it's so they don't see you as a student in the same way, and you don't see him as a teacher figure in the same way, kind of get that more connected bond. I think that's something that's pretty key there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like that working relationship plays a huge role in the reference letter that I got for Loran, but also the reference letters that I used in university applications and for other scholarships. And I think it does come down to just the details of being reliable, being dependable, always showing up, and being on time when you're answering things, just to separate yourself from the rest of the student body.
Absolutely. And I see one more question here. So this person asks, when are the quarterfinals, the semifinals, and the finals, and how much time did it take you to prepare for each level? So the quarterfinals, I don't 100% remember, but I believe they were in November, mid-November-ish. Olivia, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
That's,
Sorry, what?
that sounds about right.
Okay. And then semifinals are spread over 6 weeks. It's based on region, so they'll do a Zoom meeting for each region. So mine was one of the later ones. I think it was around December 10th or so. So kind of like not right on the Christmas season, but quite close on the holiday season. And then finals are in mid-February. They often line up with university's reading week, which is kind of like their February break, if you're a province that has a February break. So that's when that is. And for time wise, ooh, I don't know if I can think of like an exact amount. I think I kind of chipped away at it a little bit each day, so it kind of all blended in together. Definitely, it's a fair amount of time. It increases your preparation with each stage. So I spent more time on the semifinals I did on the quarterfinals, and I spent more time on the finals I did the semifinals. But I definitely would just make a habit of, if you have free time in the evening, just get someone maybe to do a mock interview with you about your activities. Review your original application. That's a huge one.
Mm.
And just take that time to, just kind of learn how to verbalize your answers. So at that point, they know that you've done a lot of activities and you have the qualification, but they want to see if you can talk about it and express it, and that you have that vision for the future, what you're going to do with the lessons you've learned from your activities. So I think just spending some time reflecting on that whenever you have a free chance is definitely key.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I also think it's important to note that the type of preparation, at least for me, that I did before quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals did differ a lot. So for quarterfinals, the preparation that I did was super focused on answering basic interview questions. I was not being interviewed by a live person, so it's answering questions like what motivates you, what are you driven about? Basic interview questions that when you search up what interview questions should I prepare for, those ones that come up, those are the ones you'll see in quarterfinals. Whereas in semifinals, the people who will interview you are people who have read your application. So that's when, as Liam said, reading back through your application and actually studying your application is super important because they're going to ask you specific questions. And then for final interviews, which I kind of saw as the final boss, was to make sure to be super drilled down on the specific details of what's in your application. I made that mistake actually. It's quite a funny story. I put down in my application that I had read the Social Contract by Descartes. I don't remember the author, but it's this philosophy book that at the time of the application, I was in the middle of reading and then I stopped reading it. And then I forgot that I put it in my application. And then during one of my finals interviews, I was asked about my favorite idea from the book, and I couldn't remember anything from the book. I was able to come up with an answer, thank God. But I think that's just a story of if you put it in your application, make sure to be able to speak about it in detail, even if it seems like a really minute detail. Make sure to be ready for it.
Absolutely. Like I'd say even in some of my final interviews, they were asking about individual word choices.
Yeah.
And like tiny little contradictions. They said like, oh, you said A about this, but you said B about this. Tell us a bit about that difference. It was kind of a question similar to that, not exactly that. But
Yeah.
it's definitely something to be really well versed with your original application. And for any multi step scholarship like this one, where there's multiple rounds, that's a big tip, is be sure you know what you originally wrote, because they're always going to be referring back to that. And the other thing too is in any scholarship, if they ask you anything, if they send you additional questions, additional surveys, be sure to take note of that, because they're the reason that they sent that. That will come up later. So be
Yep.
sure to be 100% aware.
Yes, yes. They will definitely bring it up later. Also learned that from experience as they brought up answers that I brought up in a online form. So be ready, be prepared, and be aware of what you say, know what you say, be educated on what you say, be ready to back it up and argue it.
Yeah, it definitely isn't the place kind of to make like sweeping generalizations when you talk or talk about things that you can't really back up or you don't have a lot of knowledge about, because in any scholarship they will probably challenge you on that and ask you to explain. So you definitely want to have, whenever you say something, you want to have a reason why in the back of your head to pull out later.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think if you're being authentic and if you're really being yourself and just saying what you've done, I don't think that should be a challenge because it really is like, hey, why have you done this? Oh, I've done this because I'm passionate about it or because I was driven towards it by this. So it comes back down to that authenticity, at least for me. And the question right now I see in the chat box is what are the final essays before the finals like? I heard they're timed. Um, Good point. So there aren't final essays before the finals, but there is a form. So that's the form that I was referring earlier. It is timed. It's 2 hours. Um, they see in the chitter chatter between finalists because everyone somehow finds each other's numbers and makes a group chat. We all thought it would only take about 30 minutes. I don't know how we got to that conclusion. It definitely took 2 hours. Um, it's not as intense as you think it would be, but also be ready for curveball questions like what's your favorite movie? And be ready to speak about what you've said, a month later when you're in Toronto.
Yeah, I would say that those questions, those final, I wouldn't call them essays, but final kind of questions, they're often like starting points for them to build their final questions off of, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So they kind of take your answers and they build off it. And sometimes it's just for fun. Like I actually had one question, which was like about a hobby. And I talked about, I collect these vinyl figures called Funko Pops. You might have seen them at some stores. And in my final interview, me and one of the interviewers, he also collected them. So we just started talking about that for like a minute. And it was like, there was no like pressure to it. It was just our favorite ones, stuff like that. It was a really wholesome moment, actually. So that's the other thing too. When it comes to scholarships, I think in our collective consciousness and how media portrays them, we think the people who make the questions are out to trick us. They often aren't. They often are there just to get to know you and just to understand you better as a person. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be ready for some questions that might be a bit confusing or might challenge you in a way you haven't thought of before.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do get a question that is confusing or challenging, ask them to repeat it. It's not a weakness to need to hear it again or even a few times, or even ask them to repeat it slower, or even after a question to just pause for a second and think. I did that a lot, and I think it enhanced my interviews.
Absolutely, giving yourself that time to think.
Yeah.
I think there's some scholars too, who, at least for some of the early questions in the earlier rounds, will like write down notes before they start to talk. Like they'll kind of jot down a few things and then they'll start talking, just so they can remember their main talking points.
Mhm.
Interviewing, it's a pretty unique sort of situation to be in. So each person has their own unique way of dealing with that. What can sometimes be stress, what can sometimes be excitement, with dealing with the interview process.
Yeah. Yeah, and remember that it is a super exciting process all the way through. Um, as anxious and nervous as it made me in some situations, it was super fun, really exciting. And honestly, once you get into the interviews, I had a great time. I actually looked forward to them once I got over the nerves. I don't see any other questions coming into the Q&A. So I think maybe we leave it here because I know we're at around 6 o'clock. Liam, anything else to add?
Yeah, we're around that 6 o'clock time frame, so I think it's all the questions. I will throw my email in the chat if something comes to you later. Then you can definitely email me. I'm not sure if Olivia will do the same,
Yep.
but that is definitely something that is key there.
Yeah, for sure. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions. I'd love to answer them. Totally here to help anyone out who is interested in getting involved in the Loran community. I highly, highly suggest it to take that step and to bet on yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of conclude everything, Yeah, so Liam and Olivia have put their emails in the chat box. So if anyone just wants to reach out to this, if you didn't get the chance to ask any of your questions today, please feel free to just send them an email whenever you have these types of questions about the Loran Scholar or just kind of general questions also about like high school life, for example. And yeah, I really enjoyed today's webinar for me as well, just being a high school student. I really enjoyed all of your personal stories and also like kind of just understanding there's really no perfect process of it and learning about that. I think that's a very important thing to understand. And I really enjoyed that. And I hope all of you guys, participants and attendees, also like today's webinar as well. For more information about this, I have a recording of this webinar and I will be putting it onto the website and also the Instagram. So if some of your friends weren't able to attend today or anyone you know who would like to know about this information, feel free to just send them this recording so that they can also understand more about the Loran Scholarship. But yeah, so that kind of concludes today's webinar. So Liam and Olivia, do you guys have any more ending remarks or anything else you'd like to say?
I do see people are saying in the Q&A that the chat is disabled, so they can't see the email addresses.
Oh,
So I will unshare this presentation and I'll get both of them onto like a Google Doc here quick.
okay.
So I'll get that sorted out in
Oh,
a
thanks.
second. I'll just have to stop sharing my screen. So stick around and we will have those email addresses for you. Very sorry about that.
And thank you so much, everyone, for being here and being so on top of it. And Queenie, thank you so much for organizing this. I know Leah and I were both super excited to be able to share a little bit about our experiences.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time that you've put into organizing this.
No worries at all. I really enjoyed this whole process because I think it's just such a good way to like learn more about Canadian scholarships as well. Because I feel like there's not that many opportunities out there where people can actually like have a webinar where people talk about it from scholars themselves. So yeah. Oh yeah. So the emails are now on the document. And also I'll also put it like on the website later on during the post with the recording. So if you would like to just take a screenshot of this, that also works. But yeah, okay. So if that is it then, because I don't think there's any more questions. And so yeah, I think that concludes today's webinar then. So please stay tuned for more information that will be posted both on the website and the Instagram for the recording and the emails as well if you didn't get a chance to screenshot it. And yeah, just feel free to contact Liam or Olivia if you have more questions about the Loran Scholarship. But yeah, that will be the end of today's webinar. Thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you to Liam and Olivia for being so nice to share their personal stories as well as the whole application process. I hope all of you guys enjoyed today.
Thanks so much,
Yeah,
everyone.
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you so much for coming out and listening to us talk for about an hour. I know I would have really appreciated an opportunity like this when I was last year. So I hope you guys gained something from this and hopefully it helps you on your scholarship journey. So best of luck.
Thank you, everyone.